As spoiler season is upon us, we have 3 brand new criminal cards to reveal from Nisei's second set, Uprising. Each one unique, together they form both the tools and the toolbox of our criminal tinkerers. The back, a less than legal job, sees you breathing new life into the fleeting contraptions you've dashed on a corporation's servers. Remember, after your stack has been reduced, be sure to reuse and recycle. Prognostic Q-Loop will let you glimpse the future. Forging programs on hardware at instant speed, this small chip gives our illicit allies even more tricks up their sleeves. And finally, the Boomerang. This modern take on an archaic yet elegant hunting weapon can help you clean through even the mightiest of defenses. And, if thrown correctly, it might just come back. I'm absolutely excited to talk to you today about these 3 upcoming criminal cards. I front-loaded these images just for those who wanted to quickly check them out, but do stay tuned as we dive into what we think we can do with these new illicit implements. Hello and welcome back to the Metropole Grid. My name is Andre. Thanks so much for tuning in. Just as you saw at the top of this video, we got 3 new criminal cards from the upcoming Uprising pack we have the pleasure of revealing today. We're going to be talking about them in this video. We're going to be going through these cards, what you can do with them, what sort of decks they would fit into, and how excited we are for these. If you might not know, the new Netrunner cards are still coming out and still exist. I would recommend you to check out a website, Nisei.net. The short of the long is Nisei is a fan run. It's a group, it's a community of volunteers that have been over the last year and a half now, putting together new cards, organizing organized play. They've been doing so much for the last year and a half of Netrunner. It's been absolutely fantastic. And we have 3 new cards. Again, the whole set is going to be coming out on the 16th of December. So do check that out if you want to see the full list. And there's probably a couple other cards you're going to be seeing spoiled across other channels and other platforms this week. So do stay tuned. So real quick, we're going to be diving into the cards. We're going to talk about the cards as they exist, what we can do with them, what some cool fun combos, what sort of decks that we'd be excited to put them in. We do talk majority about standard format. So that's the format that's probably the most regularly competitively played. So that has a limited card pool, usually the newer stuff. But we also will be addressing kind of the more maybe kitchen top, tabletop Netrunner, maybe the more casual stuff. We do still play a heck of a lot of that. All right. So, timestamps in the description below if you want to jump to a certain card. Otherwise, let's start at the top, and the top is the back. For 1 credit, you get this unique resource. It's both a job and a location. Those are both fun subtypes. We don't see a lot of jobs, do we? This is the first time each turn you use hardware during a run. Place 1 power counter on this resource. Then you can spend a click to remove this resource from the game and shuffle up to X cards that have trash abilities from your heap into your stack, and X is actually double the amount of hosted power counters on this card. Junk plus undiscerning buyers equal profit as McCaffrey. This is a 4 influence card, technically splashable, but recursion generally has been a pretty powerful effect that's going to largely stay in criminal. And the art is actually something we've seen before. This art was released in an article or more like a story that's released on Nisei.net. That is as themselves working on their own arm. So the back is not actually like a connection. I would always assume a card like this is a connection, someone you go to that helps you with this sort of thing, but it's actually yourself. You picked up a job working on some hardware. Cool. This is actually a very nuanced and interesting card. There's a lot of different conditions on it. Firstly, we have to understand how we power this thing up because it's a bit kind of nuanced. Then we got to figure out what we want to shuffle back and what that means for our decks. First thing to say really quickly, job is a subtype that comes up on As. As gets a discount installing their first job per turn, and we don't have a lot of jobs in the game. It's actually very countable, so just having another job in the game is pretty cool. It's also worth noting that this card, there's no ways right now to tutor jobs in the game. If it was a connection, there's ways to find it from your deck, so you're gonna have to find this card in your deck. It's unique also, you can only have 1 installed at a time. All right, so that's actually a really big thing that comes alongside Uprising on its release on the 16th is that there's going to be a rotation of cards from the standard card pool. One of the big rotations is Creation and Control, which contains Levy AR Lab Access, the most powerful mass recursion card, the ability that you can take cards that you've spent, thrown out, used, and put them back in your deck and go. This card won't exist in standard format very soon. So the idea of having a recursion card that is, it's like a really important thing to a fair couple criminal archetypes. I think the biggest one is Geist. Geist has been actually really difficult to play, even while Levy has been around. It hasn't left just yet, on the basis that Levy's a restricted card, and you also need, generally you use Tech Trader in Geist, which is another restricted card. So Geist for a while has had problems dealing with recursion, and the back has trash cards on it. Geist plays a lot of trash cards. This actually fits really well, which is really exciting because shout out to Nisei. They definitely know I'm a big fan of Geist, and we can play some Geist again, which is really cool. Another really cool thing about recursion is we've seen this more and more. Levy has always been an interesting card. It's always ended up on most wanted lists to some extent. And we're seeing more and more with the design, I guess like Trope and maybe with District 99, where the recursion cards are more nuanced. They're generally a bit more targeted. Labor Rights is, I guess, another good example. They're more targeted. They're more situational. They're not just like take everything, put it back, go again. And I do like the design. I think recursion is a very interesting space. Figuring out when to pop the back and what to put back into your deck is actually a pretty interesting problem to solve. It's not just like mass Levy, everything goes back. So having a recursion card, specifically having a blue recursion card, it's both fascinating and very important for at least Geist. Okay, so you need to get power counters on this card, and how do you do that? It's the first time you use a hardware during a run. Now, use a hardware is actually a kind of a tricky sentence. Using a card in Netrunner is something that's actually pretty well defined in the rules, and it might not be what you think exactly it is. I think a lot of people would think using a card just means having some text on the card change the game state in a meaningful way, and that's actually not entirely true. I think a really good example here is Desperado. And Desperado is a card that's not in the standard card pool, but the idea with Desperado is you gain a credit whenever you make a successful run. You can't actually use Desperado. The basis of the rules of what's considered using in Netrunner is dependent on you having to make a choice. You have to actually decide to operate a piece of hardware or any card, I guess, to use that card. So a really easy comparison is a Paragon, which is largely seen as like the rebirth of Desperado. But this one says the first time you make a successful run each turn, you may gain a credit. Sure, there's text after that, but if it was just that, that's enough, because now you're choosing to use your Desperado or your Paragon. So you're actually using your Paragon. So that difference, and a lot of times it just comes down to having the word may. If you're not making a decision with your card and your card automatically fires, it's not going to count as using. So if you want some hardware in your deck that you can use every run, and there's a lot of good options for that, you have to make sure that it kind of looks more like this, or you're firing some active ability. A good example that this used to come up back in the day when Wendigo was a card that cared about using things. Medium, when you make a run on R&D, it gets a counter. That's not considering using medium, because anytime you run R&D, that happens. But then making an option to spend those counters to see extra cards, that was your decision. So that's using medium. So one of these sentences isn't a use, the other is. And it can get really nuanced like that. I think that's important to understand. I have no doubt that's going to come up with some issues, but let's figure out what kind of hardware we can use at least once a turn during a run to get the counters on the back. There's actually a lot of really good options. Masterwork. This one also is like kind of a medium sort of idea. The first time you install a piece of hardware, draw a card. Not considered a use if you're doing that during a run. But whenever a run begins, you may install a piece of hardware. That is considering a use. And I think in the back is the sort of back decks generally are going to be probably running a lot of hardware, because a lot of hardware has trash can abilities, those trash abilities. So Masterwork is a nice time to get a hardware on your turn and use the Masterwork as the use to fire up the back. And there's a lot of good hardware that makes sense. Again, we're thinking about Geist decks. We're thinking about Az decks. These are decks that like a lot of hardware. These are decks that like a lot of trash cards. And so there's a lot of really good stuff that you can use during a run. Flip Switch, it's a fantastic card. Lets you jack out during a run, remove a tag during a run. You have spy cameras. Now this one's a bit trickier because you need to pop them during a run for this to count for the back. Popping this while you run R&D kind of seems bad, but it's an option. You have some other cool things. Forger interacts with tags during a run if you'd like. Sports Hopper lets you peel out during a run. That has some value. And then you have other things like Recon Drone, which only work during a run. Lucky Charm, also a very good thing to fire during a run. Not something you can use every turn, but it's a good start. There's basically a lot of really good criminal stuff that you end up probably in your criminal, in your Az or your Geist deck anyways, that will let you fire the back consistently. I think Masterwork is probably one of the easiest. But what about if you don't want to run a lot of trash cards? Maybe that makes the value of this a bit less good, but you can play this card out of faction for sure. There's a lot of very simple ways to get hardware used during a run. Recurring credits are considered used because you chose to use the credit off of the card. So Cyber Feeder, a card that Geist installs, Az installs for just one credit, that's a credit during each run a turn. You want to run once a turn to get your Cyber Feeder credits if you're using it for Icebreakers. This uses the back every turn. It's really easy. You got a lot of similar ideas There's a lot of really compelling hardware. I could see myself playing in an Az deck. Cards like Cyberdelia give you MU. It gives you a credit a turn as long as you're running. Fires the back. Dedicated Processor, kind of a fun card. You generally only use it during a run. And then there's some other really cool stuff. Cards like Security Nexus, and both Az and both Geist have a link. So having this console down that you want to use once a turn during a run can give you that recursion you might need for some of your other trash cards that maybe support your build. And I think that's definitely really cool. All right, so we figured out some ways to get hardware during a run. Now, what are we doing? At some point in the game, we want to remove this card from the game to take cards from our heap and put them back into our deck. And this thing's actually really cool. You don't need to get that much value out of this. This is not like Levy where you have to put back like your whole deck. You could fire this admittedly to put back like 6 cards into your deck, and it's probably not that bad. Like sometimes those are 6 really good cards, and specifically these cards have trash can abilities on them. So those cards will give you tempo. They will let you keep going quickly in the way that you want to go, specifically if you're Geist. Anytime you put a trash card back into your deck, you install it, you draw a card for free usually when you pop it, and that's really great. It lets you go through your deck. And when I've been playing this card, it reminded me a lot of old prepaid Kate decks. And there's going to be a lot of comparisons in this video between Kate and Az, as they're both McCaffreys. But the idea is, if you remember, there was this old deck called Prepaid Kate. This was one of the most competitive archetypes of many, many years ago now. And the idea is that it was a Kate deck that could cheaply install hardware and programs. It would install cards called Prepaid Voice Pad. And then it would use these credits to play money cards really cheaply, a lot of events that would give you money. And at some point, they would go through their deck because their card draw was pretty good. And then they would play Levy AR Lab Access. And they would put their whole deck back onto where the deck used to be and have a second shot at it. And the cool thing, the really incredible thing about after a prepaid Kate deck levied is all that was generally left in their deck was like good events. Like a lot of the times, all the other stuff that they would want to have in their deck, like their big resources, their programs, all that stuff was already installed. So now their deck was like very focused on like very small things and things that you were always excited to draw. A lot of times it was just like good money. And to me, this feels a lot of the times like when you get to the end of your deck with the back and you pop the back and shuffle like 16 cards into your deck, they all have trash can abilities. At that point in time, you're probably already set up with what I'm assuming is a tech trader economy. So from now on, any card you draw from the top of your deck is going to give you generally 3 credits. It's going to draw you cards with Geist. It's an incredible amount of tempo. Suddenly your whole deck, you can in theory draw, if you built it the right way, your whole deck in a turn or 2 while making like billions and billions of credits. That's an exaggeration. But the idea is that like, your deck is now all spy cameras, and this is a good card to recur. Every spy camera gives you that money, gives you that card draw if you set up with Tech Trader and Geist, and lets you see the top of R&D, which is generally how you're going to win a lot of the times in some of these decks. You got Street Peddler, which accelerates you through the deck. Admittedly, maybe too fast, because if you have 3 trash things on their Street Peddler, you're only going to get 1 of them. That's a bit unfortunate. And I would actually consider cards like Bizarre. It's like really cool. Say at the point where you've gone through your deck and now you install and draw Sports Hopper, you draw 4 cards, you're probably drawing a fair bit of hardware with the same name, a fair bit of, hardware, right? With the same name. Maybe you have 6 spy cameras in your deck. And I'd actually maybe consider a Bizarre just so you can get them all down one click. Now, this admittedly might be a bit ambitious, and something that's probably good earlier in the game and just good overall is probably play DJ Fenris, and then you can Fenris into Haley, specifically in Geist, and you can now just start double installing everything you draw that has trash abilities on it, and that's super cool. It's cool. All these like really good Geist cards accelerate you through your deck. Your deck is gonna be just them at some point, and you're gonna be set up for money. You're gonna be flying through your stuff. You can install very efficiently. It's a really good thing to do, and I don't think you need to wait till the end of your deck to fire this. Now this card is 4 influence, and that's still a really big thing, is Levy AR Lab Access is leaving the standard format. So there's probably a couple other decks that want to play this. In Shaper, you need to find a deck that runs a lot of trash can abilities, right? Like this card only really goes with other decks that want to pay a lot of trash can abilities, and there are really strong decks that run that. So this is what's considered a Pirate Haley deck. This was also a very competitive archetype for a couple months back in the day. And this is a Haley deck that was running the same sort of idea that Geist would, a lot of tech traders, and then running a lot of things with trash can abilities on it. I think this deck list came out before Bahali came out, but that's the idea. And this sort of deck list would run 2 Levy AR Lab Access, and sure, influence might be tighter now, but this sort of archetype where Haley rebirths, maybe even DJ Fenris into Geist, I think you probably do that modernly, and then you play cards like your Bahali and your Grappling Hook, that's pretty good in Shaper. Shaper also has some other really strong trash cards. Getting your self-modifying codes back into your deck Admittedly, maybe by later in the game that's not that valuable, but there's some cool things you can do with it if you're actually pulling other programs from your deck that have trash can abilities on it. Deus Ex, mind you, again, all these things you're doing is making you money. Deus Ex, mind you, works really well with Panchatantra. I think there's some reasons why you might consider this in that sort of Pirate Haley deck, which is an archetype that's actually kind of difficult to play because of both. That was the problem we had, right? Like Levy and Tech Trader, both restricted. Now, what about if you want to play this in like standard criminal that's not Geist or it's not As? Is there anything like what other cards would we consider recurring? And I think there's actually some really compelling things if you don't want to go all in into the Geist decks that run like 25 trash cards. There's some good standard normal like basic Netrunner criminal stuff. Bachlan Botchkin is a really fun aggressive card. You can put this back into your deck. You have some breakers. We did lose one of them in the standard format, but we do have a Fractor and we do have a Decoder. Sometimes using this ability is a cool thing to do, and you can always panic and put them back into your deck if you lose them to damage, which is something actually that happens a fair bit to criminals. Bankroll, a really cool aggressive card, but once you pop it, that economy engine dries up, so maybe you want to get a couple more in your deck. Again, maybe popping back just to put 3 Bankroll back into your deck is good enough. Of course, this is a Geist thing, but maybe Khan can play this as well. Getting these sort of breakers, these sort of like temporary breakers back into your deck is really important. Of course, this goes really well with cards like Gabal and Kangamato. These shards, actually, these rotate. I totally forgot that these rotate. And maybe even you got some wackier stuff. I think you can play a fair bit of trash cost cards inside, what's his name? Adam, right? Like Logic Bomb, a heck of a card. Recurring this would be very compelling. You also can be running Kangamato, Gabahali. They're pretty good inside Adam. This card is really fun. This is probably now the easiest way in the game to recur bad publicity. I don't know if there's going to be some degenerate combo stuff where you can get to end of your deck quickly and then you can just choose what your deck is entirely with the back. But you can recur this over and over again, which is pretty fun. It does not remove itself from the game. There's some other really cool strong stuff like DDoS. DDoS is cool. If you want to recur this aggressively, and there's some criminal decks that'll splash DDoS on the basis that they're Leela decks that don't want things to res, or they're Apocalypse decks, and that's pretty cool. I think that's pretty smart. And hey, at the end of the day, right, like just sometimes having more cards in your deck is good enough, even if it doesn't matter what the cards are. Sometimes you're just against a net damage deck, and that's very exciting. Of course, all this stuff we're talking about has a built-in econ engine associated with it if you're playing Tech Trader. So it's really easy to get a card like that into your deck where you know like, oh, this is going to give me more money in the late game and I already am working around building my deck around this sort of stuff. But there's some other options. You have Technical Writer, which is really strong. Again, this is another card kind of like Bankroll where once it's popped, it's done. And once you get at the end of your deck and it's just Technical Writer and a bunch of like cheap hardware and program that have trash costs on it, you're set up to get a huge boost of economy that actually in Geist, I generally don't know how to spend. I need to put real breakers in my deck. I'm usually just playing the break and enter suite. That's largely the back, and I think on the basis alone that this lets me play Geist again in a pretty reasonable way is like super exciting. But on top of that, there is some flexibility with this. I think you're mostly going to see it in those sort of decks that want to run a lot of hardware, that are going to want to run a lot of course, trash cards. But those decks don't mind the recursion. Again, if they want to put the hardware in their deck because they can do something cool with it, you might as well be able to do it again. And again, using this ability, you want to do that anyways. And I love that. I love when the thing that you're doing is something that's just happening anyways. Like District 99 had the same sort of idea. And that ability was sometimes a bit harder to fire. You needed a bit of support. Where did I put District 99? But this one doesn't have that issue so much. This one, I think, will just be happening as you play the game anyways, specifically if you build a deck around that recursion. Hey, talking about As, this is Prognostic Q-Loop. So there's a preface here. I guess we'll read the card first. For 1 credit, you get Prognostic Q-Loop. It's a hardware. It's also unique. It's a chip subtype, which isn't something that has mattered just yet, I don't believe. And it says the first time each turn a run begins, you may look at the top 2 cards of your stack. Now, you can pay a credit to reveal the top card of your stack, and you may install that card if it's a program or a piece of hardware, but you can only use this ability once per turn. Overinflate a superposition stack in optimal code forms, the neg entropy traverse, like putting too much air into a balloon. I honestly don't know what that means. It's 3 influence, and this is a really exciting and flexible card. I'm really pumped to play with this one a fair bit. So it's worth noting when As came out in Downfall, which is now a couple months ago, Nisei wrote an article associated to it, and they say like As obviously wants to be comboed with a lot of nice criminal hardware, specifically cheap hardware, right? But that hardware did not show up in Downfall alongside As. And Nisei said specifically, hey, in the future in Uprising, we'll be packing a bunch of hardware that As can really embrace. And I haven't enjoyed playing As that much with the card pool that we have right now. I just found that the ability fired like 6 or 7 times a turn, and that wasn't enough. I was making like some savings of credits, but not as much as I wanted to. And we just needed some cool hardware and some ways to get hardware onto the table. Obviously, connections and jobs as well. And it's finally here. But this card I think is way more interesting than just with As. I think As is definitely a very prime candidate, and we'll be talking about that in a second. But you can do some hecka interesting stuff in this. Let's again break it down into 2 parts, because these 2 things are related, but they don't necessarily have to, which actually kind of makes this card incredibly flexible. So firstly, the first sentence, the first time each turn or run begins, you may look at the top 2 cards of your stack. Okay. Firstly, it says may, so it's a choice. So off the top, Prognostic Q-Loop lets you fire the back. You're doing it during a run and you're using a piece of hardware. On its own, that's a really easy way to use a piece of hardware every run, because you can do this first run a turn, you're in a good spot. And now you look at the top 2 cards of your stack, and that is a very powerful effect. Yeah. This is really cool. I thought Oracle May for a while was in creation and control, but it isn't. And the idea is that if you know the first 2 cards on top of your stack, Oracle May is really easy to play. Mind you, this is also a connection, so As installs Oracle May for free if you time your turn right. So now you spend a click, you name the type of the card that you just looked at, you can do it next turn if you don't draw or you set it up in the right way, and you gain 2 credits. That's a really good card. That's a really good engine. Obviously, you have to reveal the card to the corp, which has some downsides. You have to watch out. They know what you're holding in your hand. They can play around that. But being able to click and draw a card for 2 credits is fantastic. It's really good. And I could see this playing this in really any faction, any deck. Criminal saves a 3 influence on this. Oracle Mate is 1 influence. It's a neutral card still, but you can definitely do it. Also, shoutouts. I didn't realize you can play Oracle May with the Class Act. If you want to like not give the corp that information, you can Oracle May, reveal the top card, and then draw that top card and the card underneath and keep one of those. You don't have to keep the card that you revealed with Oracle May, because it just says draw. That's actually a really spicy combo. Class Act, a heck of a card. A really, really cool card. So, one of the big reasons why, so this has come up before. So Kate was a really strong ID, and Kate and As look very similar. Kate gives you that once per turn discount on hardware and programs, while As gives you it on jobs, connections, and hardware. And the problem, one of the really good strengths with Kate is that it was actually very easy for you to get Kate's ability to fire on the corpse turn. If anything says once per turn, that not only means your turn, but it also means the corpse turn. So if Kate can install things, and Kate can install or could install things pretty consistently on the corpse turn, you're doubling the value of your identity, and that's incredibly strong. And that was kind of the problem I had with As, is that I can only usually fire the ability on my turn, and as soon as you can double it, you kind of are doubling the value of playing this identity. And I think As really needs that. As you really want to fire as much as possible, specifically for an ID or for an ability that looks like this. Now, Kate used to be really good at that, right? You had cards like Clone Chip, you had cards like Self-Modifying Code. It wasn't that hard to, before your turn starts, install something with one of these to get that discount from Kate. And Prognostic Q-Loop is now the first time I think we have a card that can compellingly install hardware off of your turn. Now, you can pay a credit to reveal the top card of your stack. And again, if you are using Prognostic Q-Loop and you're running consistently, you probably know the top 2 cards of your stack. So you can fire that, and you can use the ability, and you can install hardware, saving 1 credit if it's on the corpse turn. Again, this you can use once per turn, which means the corpse turn and the runner's turn. And that's incredible. Not only is that really cool because you can save money, but that's kind of the problem with a lot of these cards. A lot of these cards aren't very tempo positive, is how I would say it, right? Like installing a flip switch is good. Obviously, it's a fine card, but it's a click I spend doing something that's not that aggressive on the board. It doesn't force the corp in a strong way. Like I don't know. It's not advancing the game or controlling the game in that meaningful a way. There's a lot of stuff like that. This comes up a lot with these sort of breakers, the break and enter suite. A lot of times these cards, you need to install a whole bunch of them, and it's a whole bunch of clicks before they even become relevant at all. And cards like Prognostic Q-Loop accelerate that. In theory, as long as your deck is built in the right way, or you know the top of your deck, or you're just incredibly lucky, that's 2 click-free, not credit-free, but click-free installs every turn. And that is incredibly powerful for a deck that wants to set up with a lot of hardware they probably have in their deck. And that's such a big deal for ads. I think this like really scratches the itch or the issues I had with ads, where this accelerates me playing all this like cheap hardware that like I need to get a bunch of this or programs before it's relevant, and lets me fire my ability more often. And that's good stuff. Now, a really cool thing about this too is you can do it during a run, and that's kind of fun. Like you can use this credit during a run, or actually just like clicklessly installing things, I guess, during your turn is fine enough. Cyber Trooper Talent is actually a pretty compelling card. It gives Link, but it also increases the strength of icebreakers installed. And so if you can start spamming out stuff like crowbars and shivs and spikes, they have extra strength. And I think Cyber Trooper Talent and Prognostic Q-Loop go well together. Of course, Technical Writer, just like we talked about, any deck that has a lot of things that they want to install, programs and hardware, this accelerates it and it lets your Technical Writer get writing a lot faster, and that's a big deal. This is also another really good card that combos with DJ Fenris if you want to play Bizarre. That also works pretty well. Or if you want to just play Haley, DJ Haley, or just play Haley. Prognostic Q-Loop is so cool. Prognostic Q-Loop is like incredibly powerful in Haley as well, right? You reveal the top card of your deck, you install it, then you install something from a hand. You do it on your turn and the corpse turn. Clickless installations. That's really, really, really strong. Also, as a criminal card, man, Corporate Grant is oppressive. It's such an oppressive card, and there's another card that like the value of this thing doubles as soon as you can consistently install things on the corpse turn. And sure, you can't play this on Tech Trader right now. They're both on the most wanted list, but if you build a Corporate Grant and maybe an Az deck that doesn't run Tech Trader, oh my god, you can start pinging for so much money. You don't even have to play Az, I guess. You could play 419 or something else. Also, cool thing is you can use this ability during a run. This is not only setup, this can also be just like cool tricks. Khan kind of had that ability in some way, and I think Prognostic Q-Loop, it might just be a better version of Khan. It's less flexible. The card has to be on top of your deck, but you can still do cool stuff during a run. It lets you use bad publicity in a meaningful way. Sometimes maybe you run archives for no reason, so you can look at the top 2 cards of your deck, and then you can install one for less money based off of how much bad publicity you have. And you can start stim hacking stuff out. This is really cool because you can do this credit, reveal the top, install it, paying its cost. You can do it during a run. So you could stim hack archives turn 1 as long as you know it's on top of your deck, and install some really expensive things really cheaply. You can get Femme Fatales down mid-run. As long as you know there's a Femme on top of your deck, which we'll talk about that problem in a second, you can just stim hack whatever central, and then once they res something, you're like, oh shit, I need to Femme that, pull out your Femme, and it's good to go, and they don't expect it. Usually a Femme doesn't show up off the top of your deck. Same thing goes for Security Nexus. This is an expensive card, and getting this down in a criminal deck is pretty good. It's also a piece of hardware, so that's good value for everyone. I know we have credit kiting. This is just another exciting way to do it outside of tags. Now, of course, this combo is only good if you can control what's on top of your deck, but I'd argue that's actually not that difficult. Test Run is a really strong card in a deck that runs Femme Fatale, and so you can test run your Femme Fatale, do something incredibly aggressive. Next turn, it goes on top of your stack. Boom, stim hack that stuff out. It's on top of your deck. You know it's there. You can even Oracle Maid if you want. We have some other like really strange ways of doing it. Cards like Rolodex, that's pretty cool. And we also get some really interesting stuff. My god, Prognostic Q-Loop with Brahmin? Whenever an encounter with a piece of ice ends that you use Brahmin, you have to take a program and put it on top of your stack. Now you know it's on top of your stack, so as long as you pay that credit, you can install it back onto the table. With Haley, you get some really cool triggers with that too. And it's important to understand that David does rotate at the same time this card comes out, so it's not going to be crazy. But now you can do some really, really cool stuff with cards like Chameleon. The idea is that you can use Chameleon, you can call a type, then you can use your Brahmin, put the Chameleon top of your deck, Prognostic Q-Loop your Chameleon back, choose a different type. You can do some like incredibly Shaper-esque stuff in Criminal or Shaper. This is so cool that this card has some crazy interactions. It can't be a virus though, so I guess Cash rotates too. I think that's really cool. And of course, there's so much other hardware that we talked about at the beginning of this video, specifically in relation to the back. There's like really good cheap stuff that just installing during your run is good. You have that panic flip switch you can always pull out. You can pull out a sports hopper to mass draw if you really need to, I guess. You can pull out that recon drone. Finally, you can play recon drone, I suppose. And this is incredibly flexible. And not only in the criminal way, not only in the Az, not only in the Geist, I think there's some really interesting thing you can do this in just about any faction. And heck, even if you play just like your standard criminal 419 and you play Prognostic Q-Loop, you're going to get information on what you're drawing. That's incredibly powerful. Sure, you have Class Act, and sometimes that will show you the 2 cards anyways, but knowing what you're going to draw is kind of cool. And on top of that, you can play Oracle May. And it's 2 credits to draw a card, and gain a credit is a lot of value. That is a lot of value. Hey, future Andre here. I'm right now editing this video together, and I just wanted to take a second to talk about Prognostic Q-Loop, or kind of iterate how great it's been so far. If I could do this video again, I would actually open with that card just instead of the back. The back is cool, but I've had more time now to do some testing with Prognostic Q-Loop. There's going to be some videos of Az and Geist coming up in a couple days on this channel, and it's the card of the 3 that I've been the most impressed with, but most importantly, the most excited to do more deck building with. Being able to install programs and hardware clicklessly is just so incredibly good. In Az, you get that discount, you have corporate grants firing, you got your Masterworks firing, you can do it mid-run, you can do these really cool tricks. But even outside of that, like I talked a bit about doing this in Shaper, but playing this in Haley, where you're firing this off every turn and clicklessly doing a double install, it's wild. I think it's like a very universally usable card, and it encourages you to some strange fun builds. And I just want to reiterate that I think this thing is kind of nuts, and I'm super excited to do some more building with it. Again, I wanted to lead with this card. Maybe this insert is not worth much at all, but I just wanted to shout out to this card. It's really cool. That's all. Thanks. Now, of course, this card gets even better if there's more like really strong hardware, specifically hardware that maybe you want to install mid-run, because that's a really good benefit of Prognostic, is you can do it mid-run. And don't worry, Nisei has your back here. This is 2 credits to get you a Boomerang. It's a unique hardware. When you install this hardware, you get to choose an installed piece of ice, and you can only use this hardware only during encounters with that ice. It's kind of like Femme Fatale. Femme Fatale at the end of the day was a Sentry Breaker though, but this is only on that ice that you target, like Femme Fatale. When you trash this card, you can break up to 2 ice subroutines. When this run ends, if it was successful, you may shuffle a copy of Boomerang from your heap into your stack. Return to sender. It's 2 influence. It's important to understand that this card is unique. That's actually a big balance of this card. And sometimes we talk about the theme of the cards. I'm assuming we know what Boomerangs are. For what it's worth, Prognostic means be able to see the future. And that's really cool. So, just starting off, all the cards that we're talking about today have a really strong synergy. Boomerang is a trash cost ability. Sure, this card can recur itself, but sometimes it doesn't. So being able to put that back into your deck is good. It's also a hardware that you can only use during a run, which is really good for the back. And it's a really cool card to have on top of your deck. And when the corp reses a really strong piece of ice, you can pay that 3 credits, maybe 2 credits with the Az discount to get the Boomerang on the table to break through 2 pieces of ice. This is a really, it's a strong card, and this is actually very comparable to a bunch of other criminal cards we already have. Of course, Gabahali is actually very similar to this, but there's some big nuances. The big strength of Gabahali and Kongamato, and also to some extent, of course, Grappling Hook, is the basis that you can install them on the table and then run. And Boomerang has to be more targeted. You need to pick a piece of ice, and it's only good against that piece of ice. It's also unique, so you can install a Boomerang from hand to replace the Boomerang that's on the table to pick another piece of ice, but then you're trashing that Boomerang, so you're not going to be able to recur it, right? Because recursion on this involves a successful run, so that's not going to happen, unfortunately. So Gabali, Kongamato, Grappling Hook, you can put on the table. It's good safety, you can charge anywhere. Boomerang has to be a bit more targeted. And I think target is actually a strength of this card. This is something that we talked about before with Gabali, but like, you could do some really strong pressure plays, and maybe this is a bigger thing in Eternal format where you have stronger run events, cards like Account Siphon. But the idea is turn 1, say the corp installs an ice in front of HQ, maybe plays a hedge fund and does something else. You can put a Boomerang on HQ. Most ice that ends the run don't have more than 2 subroutines that end the run. It's usually like some annoying tax end the run. So you can Boomerang HQ and just Diversion of Funds or Account Siphon, and it will usually land turn 1. Which is incredible. That is such immense power for a card that says, hey, this turn I'm getting in. And criminals have that sort of ability. Like it's a deck that has cards, or a faction that has cards in faction, like what's it called? Inside Job and Spearfishing. But the idea with these cards that say I can get in turn 1 if I really want to, you couldn't play them at the same time as a run event. And this is kind of like an Inside Job that you can play with a run event. And that's incredibly terrifying. I could see this card being played in Apocalypse decks. And the cool thing about Boomerang is that once you Boomerang before your Apocalypse, if your runs are successful, which you want them to be anyways, it's back to your deck, and you're good to set up Apocalypses in the future. And again, with these Inside Jobs and with these Spearfishings and the Boomerangs, like, there's actually a lot of pressure like turn 1 against the remote. If they want to jam something behind 1 or 2 pieces of ice, you could probably get in, and maybe the question is knowing when you should get in or when it matters, and criminals have that covered as well. Now again, we said this before, this only breaks up to 2 ice subroutines, but a lot of times that is enough. You could combo this with Gabahale and Kongamato or Grappling Hook if you need to break a lot of subroutines. That I think only matters really against maybe stopping like an Overstate AI on a big card early in the game. But a lot of times, again, 2 subroutines is enough. And also a lot of times 2 subroutines is actually really good. Surveyor is a card that is pretty prevalent, and being able to deal with the Surveyor consistently, especially late in the game, this is one of the better answers to it. It's important to know also, when you install Boomerang, you have to pick an ice. You can pick an unresed ice, you can pick a resed ice. And understanding what ice to Boomerang is also it's pretty important. And to some extent that does recommend, or it does encourage some sort of expose. Maybe you want to play Silhouette, maybe you want deuces. But the thing is, at the end of the game, when the Surveyor is resed, you know where to get your full information with the Boomerang. This card also works in just about everything else we talked about. It's a hardware. It's a trash card with Geist. Works well with Tech Trader. You can play this in Haley too, that same sort of pirate deck. Maybe you want to play this over a Grappling Hook. Honestly, I don't know. The fact that this is unique jams the other ones in your hand, which is maybe not the best with Haley. And it has built-in recursion into it. I think the built-in recursion is also a bit interesting because you can choose when to fire this. You don't always have to fire this. I've actually played in the early game where I fire an early Boomerang and I think, do I want this back in my deck or do I rather set up? Would I be upset if I drew a Boomerang in the next 5 turns as opposed to something I'm really looking for, like a Tech Trader? And a lot of times in the early game, maybe in my first or my second Boomerang, I didn't shuffle back, but my third Boomerang, that was the one I was keeping. And you have that option, which is really cool. Maybe the ones that you don't keep, you can later recycle back into your deck with the back. It's also worth noting though, and this is the thing, because the Boomerang I think is a totally very powerful pressure card in a deck that isn't like Az or Geist. Like, it doesn't have to be a strange built a certain way deck, just like the standard good stuff criminal could consider Boomerang. And actually shuffling your deck can be a good thing, but a lot of times is not a good thing if the criminal is playing cards like Class Act or Paragon, cards that order your deck, where sometimes you draw your second copy of a unique card, so you put on the bottom of your deck and you know you're not going to draw it for the rest of the game. And then once you shuffle with your Boomerang, it kind of goofs that whole up. It's like Daily Business Show and Maryland Campaign. Sometimes it puts your agendas back up at the top, so sometimes you opt not to use the Maryland Campaign. And I think that's cool that there's a choice to it. I just think you need to keep that in mind for sure. Again, also, it has to be a successful run, so this card, while it can break border control, once this thing is gone, it might be hard to contest the like Surveyor border control remote if you're relying on Boomerang. That's kind of the issue. Again, also, not successful. Cards like Chrysium Grid is an issue. Blue Sun, be careful. If you Boomerang an unresed ice, they can always bounce the ice, and then you have absolutely no way to return your Boomerang. It is literally useless. You have no way of destroying it, which is pretty funny. But overall, I think it's a really powerful card. Again, a hardware that turn 1 lets you get into a server associated with a run event is incredibly powerful. Again, and I think all these cards, besides maybe the back, I think these 2 cards you can definitely play in just about any criminal. If you're really excited about Az and Geist and playing all that good hardware, getting all those trash costs, getting those free draws, I think the back is exciting as well as everything else. But these cards work really well together, which I love seeing in a design where you get a couple things that are toys that work well together, but also separately are pretty interesting. Those are the 3 criminal cards that we have today to talk about, and I'm so excited. It's also important to know, I don't have confirmation on this, but I'm assuming there's also going to be other criminal cards within the set, whether we're going to see more hardware and trash costs, or trash abilities, who knows, but this is just the beginning. There are 65 cards in Uprising. I think we've only seen 1 other criminal card so far, which was Swift, which has been also a really powerful hardware. But I'm actually really excited about those. Shoutouts to Nisei for throwing them this way. I think they understand I like Geist a fair bit, so it's very exciting to see as they're working on their arm. I'm very excited to hear what you think about these cards. Of course, there's some like really interesting combos that can be done with a lot of them. I'm looking at you, Prognostic Q-Loop. So for anything that I did not cover or haven't figured out yet, I would love to hear what you're excited to do with these cards. Otherwise, I've recorded this at, it's not even the end of November yet, so this has been recorded a while ago. Again, this week, there's a bunch of people revealing cards all over community spoilers. Nisei is going to be revealing all the cards really soon, so stay tuned for that. We will have on this channel some gameplay. I did have the pleasure of trying these cards out on a private server at Jateki.net, so there will be gameplay later this week, so do check that out. I'm really excited about some of the decks that I'm about to build. that's all. We'll be back soon. We'll be back on the 19th of December. That'll be the week all the new cards out. I think Pat might be here as well, and we're going to be doing some cool streaming with the new cards. But until then, I'm so excited to hear what you think about these cards, and again, really excited to see everything else on Uprising. Thanks for watching. Ciao.